find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew that it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go where you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. We're still in the season of Easter. We're still singing Easter hymns. We still call ourselves Easter people. And then we have this kind of weird, bizarre story on the beach, which actually seems more like our lives. Most of us do not have days that are like Easter Sunday, as glorious as it was. It was a wonderful celebration. Most of us have unique, sometimes bizarre, sometimes weird, sometimes crazy lives. Let's just look at a couple of the things that this author points out. Did you catch that? When they find out it's Jesus, Peter is naked in the boat. He puts on clothes to jump into the water. I don't even know what to do with that. But if you've met my kids, there's weirder things that have probably happened. And then they have this piece where they don't know it's Jesus. And then they sit down to eat. No one dared ask him who he was because they all know it was him. Why would you say that? And there's details the author puts in, like 153 fish. And 100 yards away, it reminds me of my grandfather or my father telling stories, because it always had to do with bushels or numbers of fish or yards or rods in the field. But they aren't important to the story, and yet I think it helps us to see ourselves in the story, to say this is more like my life. Imagine if everything that you did this past week was recorded. There'd be some weird facts that if you didn't know the situation, you'd be like, why did they do that? Why did they go there? Why did they say that? This is more true to our lives that we live every day. We have moments like Easter Sunday, but a lot of our lives are unknown and unpredictable, and we wonder at the end of the day, how did we get here? In this scene, the disciples have gone back to their old way of life. They're not behind locked doors anymore. Jesus has appeared to them twice. And where do they go? Not onto the rooftops to say he's risen, not onto the streets to teach this. They go back to their old way of life. Think about that. This is at the end of the Gospel of John. Now you think he's risen. Where do they go from here? They'll start churches. They'll start proclaiming this. There are no property meetings. There is no budget meeting. They have not secured any property. There's no worship and music planning. There are no pledge cards. What they do is go back to their old way of life. And there's a sense of failure and a sense of fear. Even after having seen the risen Savior. Because in a way, the Gospel of John names that there's a sense that things have fallen apart, that this mission didn't work. We know how the story unfolds. What they had is they were following this great person who seemed to be the promised one, and thousands were gathering with him, and they saw healings, and they saw amazing things, and then he died. So what they thought was going to happen, this great church, this great following, this great whatever would happen, all ended. It ended by Jesus being killed. And how do they process that? I think most of us here are not in a place in life where we thought we'd be. Imagine your 15-year-old self if you're older than 15. Remembering what you thought you'd be at 25, 40, 60, 80. It doesn't mean our lives are bad, they just aren't the lives we expected. And here are these disciples in this broken place, because not only did this not go the way they expected, but when Jesus was at the worst time in his life, they abandoned him. They walked away from him. So what do? They go back to their old way of life. I've gone out of the pickup with more ranchers after a great loss, after the loss of a loved one. Because what do? They go check the cattle. It's something that they can do. It's something that they don't have to think about. How many of us clean the bathroom when nothing else makes sense because you start with a mess and you have control and you see the end result? It's one reason I like grocery shopping. Empty cupboards, empty fridge, and for at least 5 minutes, things seem in place. We go back to our old way of life. We cling to the familiar, even if we thought we were going to be going a different direction. I like that this gospel writer names that sense of falling apart, broken pieces. In 2012, Michael Chabon wrote about the movie Moonrise Kingdom. He said, in childhood, we experience the world as unbelievably big and beautiful, but also as irretrievably broken. Sooner or later, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, we all learn the bitter lessons of our broken world. Heartbreak, violence, failure, cowardice, duplicity, cruelty, and grief. But we come to experience is beauty and brokenness mixed and mingled. This is where the disciples were. It felt broken. How do we go forward? Yes, Jesus is risen, but the whole organization, the way we thought it was going to run, isn't happening. How do we go out into the world as people who have known him and experienced such setback? Kathleen Glasgow writes, everyone has that moment, I think. The moment when something so momentous happens that it rips your very being into small pieces. And then you have to stop. For a long time, you gather your pieces. And it takes a very long time, not to fit them back together, but to assemble them in a new way. Not necessarily a better way. More a way you can live with until you know for certain that this piece should go there and that one there. So here are the disciples in this place that feels like loss. There's hope, but it feels like loss. In 1902, the poetry editor of Atlantic Monthly sent back a stack of poems with a note. The note said, our magazine has no room for your vigorous verse. Imagine being a prolific poet and getting this word back from one of the premier magazines in the day. That poet, of course, was Robert Frost. In 1905, the University of Bern turned down a doctoral dissertation. They said it was irrelevant and fanciful. If you've ever written a dissertation, you know a lot of work goes into it. You usually focus on something that you're passionate about, and to be told it's irrelevant and fanciful, but Albert Einstein went on anyway. In 1894, an English teacher put a note on a teenager's report card. She wrote a conspicuous lack of success. You think of how we can damage teenagers by the words we use to be told at 15 or 16 that you lack success. But Winston Churchill went on anyway. Now, most of us will not become world-known leaders or poets. But I think to sit in that place where they got that word, we get to see them on the other side of the story. All of us have been in that place where it felt getting skunked when we go fishing. We all know about times in our life where we had the perfect plan, we were going on the perfect path, and it all fell apart. And how do we pick up the pieces? And where do we find God in the middle of that? In our gospel story, that's where we're at with the disciples. And what happens is there's not some self-help program. There isn't judgment. Instead, Jesus comes and helps them find the pieces, helps them pick up those pieces. For 3 years, Jesus had fed, led, taught, healed, held, gathered people together, preached, and then he went on to Jerusalem. Because what he did was stand up to the bullies of the government and of religious circles. What he did was go to Jerusalem and say God's love is unconditional and it's universal, and he stood with that story even when it got him killed. And here he is, back with the disciples. He's appeared to them for 3 times now, and they do not know it's him, and even when they do, they're a little bit skittish, and they're still back to their old life. And what would I do? I would throw up my hands in disgust. I would say, are you kidding me? What else do I have to do? Why can't you understand this? That God's love is for you, and God is with you, and my promises do stand. But not Jesus. He is gentle. He is tenacious. He meets them right where they are, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And what does he do? He says, come eat some breakfast. Come join me for a meal. There is not judgment. There is nothing that says you messed up. And even that trifle, do you love me, that he says to Peter, is not about revenge. It is about restoration. His love for Peter has not changed. Peter needs to be reminded that his love for Jesus is still the same, despite the broken pieces, despite the mess in which they find themselves. What the disciples discover and we discover is that resurrection is about abundance, a grace that we can't even calculate, a grace that we can't measure. And that grace is there whether I've hit rock bottom, whether I can't even find the broken pieces, not to mention try to reassemble them. That grace is there even if I don't believe that grace is for me. And how does Jesus do it? He says, come have some breakfast. Come join me. And what we understand in this Jesus is that he invites, and we just sit down and get to be in his presence. This is the Easter story we need. We all crave this Easter story where even we, after not seeing him or not understanding it, week after week, this Jesus comes and says, come have breakfast. Our failure does not change Jesus' nature. And Jesus comes and helps us pick up the pieces. He helps us enter into our ordinary lives and find the details of God's love in those. And what does he say to Peter right at the end? Follow me. It's the same story, the same invitation, and I think it's daily for us. Follow me. So you messed up. Follow me. So you don't know what to do today. Follow me. So you don't know how to tell that friend you're sorry. Follow me. Over and over again, we find this God who does not change God's nature, but invites us to be transformed. Some of you are aware that yesterday Rachel Held Evans died. She was 37 years old. She died from complications from the flu. She's a great Christian writer. I'd like to share a quote of hers. The gospel doesn't need a coalition devoted to keeping the wrong people out. It needs a family of sinners saved by grace, committed to tearing down the walls, throwing open the doors and shouting, welcome, there's bread and wine, come eat with us and talk. This isn't a kingdom for the worthy, it's a kingdom for the hungry. Amen. I'd like to close with a prayer. Let us pray. There's a whisper inside of us. Most of the time we can ignore it if we choose, and often we neglect it. But its insistent, compelling voice reminds us that our lives are not without meaning, that we have a contribution to make, that we are called. This calledness can be hard for us, Jesus. We are all too aware of our denials of you, of all the ways we have failed to live up to our promise. We're not sure that there aren't others who are more than we are. more faithful, more responsible, more organized, more committed, more able. But it seems that you don't really hear our objections, our excuses. All you ever seem to say is just follow me. So if you see in us something worth calling, if you're committed to empowering us, infilling us, using us, then all we can do is respond nervously but wholeheartedly, yes. Amen.